So this one, folks, is more for the older children. But actually, my mum and dad read this to me when I was little. Really little, actually, I think. And then there was a BBC drama done that used to play on BFBS when we were in Germany. And it was so cool. And I think Emily's friend played Edmund, I think. Anyway, so The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I'm going to do a chapter every night. And even if there's only 2 viewers and I know who you are, this is awesome. So go for a wee. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Chapter 1. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy. The story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to a house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest train station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret and Betty, but they don't come into the story that much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair that grew over most of his face, as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet here, no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do whatever we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which just always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking in here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from down here to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than anyone had ever been in before, and the thought of all the long passages and rows of doors leading to empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There could be hawks." "Or badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out the window, you could see neither the mountains nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They'd just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in the other. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime we're pretty well off. There's a wireless, lots of books." "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore in the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into the spare room, as everyone had expected that they would, but soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armour, and after that there was a room all hung with green and a harp in a corner, and then there came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall with a door that led out onto the balcony, and then the whole series of rooms that led into each other. They were lined with books, most of them very old books, and in some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into the room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe. The sort that had a looking glass on the door. There was nothing else in the room, all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost for sure it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened easily and quickly, and 2 mothballs dropped onto the floor. Looking to the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. This was nothing like Lucy had seen, and there was nothing more that she loved than the smell and the feel of real fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in amongst the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it's very foolish to shut oneself into a wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there. She kept her arms stretched right out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further, then 2 or 3 more steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tip of her fingers. But she couldn't feel it. "This must simply be the most enormous wardrobe," thought Lucy, going still further on and on, pushing the soft folds of the coats against her to make room. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. "I wonder, is that more mothballs?" she thought, stooping down to feel with her hand, but instead of feeling hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft, powdery, and extremely cold. "This is very queer." She went on a step further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. "Why, it's just like the branches of a tree," exclaimed Lucy, and then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away, but where the back of the wardrobe had been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found she was standing in the middle of the wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and a little excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she'd set out, because she had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it's very silly to shut oneself in a wardrobe. There seemed to still be daylight there. I can always go back if anything goes wrong. She began to walk forward, crunch, 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 over the snow and through the woods towards the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of tiny feet coming toward her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist up he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like goats, and the hair on them was black and glossy, and instead of feet he had goat hoofs. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice that at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair stuck 2 horns on the front of his forehead. One of his hands, as I'd said, already held the umbrella, and in the other arm he carried several brown paper packages. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked as if he'd been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a faun. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the faun. Tomorrow I'll do chapter 2. Hope you managed a cup of tea. Good night and God bless, folks.